Welcome to our webinar on what is EDI. Today we'll be covering the fundamentals of electronic trading and how they help business operations. At the end of the session, we'll be holding a short Q&A session, so please do send your questions through via the chat function and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. My name is Robert Simpson and I'm the Marketing Director here at TrueCommerce, and I'm joined by my colleague Dan Walker, who is going to take us through the webinar today. At this point, I will pass the reins over to Dan and let him introduce himself.
Okay, thanks Robert. My name's Daniel Walker. I'm Senior Sales Executive and Account Manager here at TrueCommerce, and welcome to everyone that's joined this webinar today. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to provide an introduction to EDI. We'll cover how EDI works, who requires EDI, the different types of EDI available, and the benefits of using EDI to buying and selling organizations. So I guess I should start by trying to answer the fundamental question: what is electronic data interchange, or EDI as it's known? I guess it's fair to say that there are many definitions out there, but a simple and straightforward definition of electronic data interchange is the use of computers and networks to exchange documents in a standardized format. The key word in this statement is standardized, as by sending electronic messages in fixed formats, this means both ends of the chain can understand each other. This enables the correct exchange of information that can be processed from one end to the other without the need for human intervention to interpret the message. And by doing so, EDI enables the fast, accurate, and reliable exchange of business transactions between the computer systems of buying and selling organizations and their trading partners, such as third-party logistics organizations who are working closely with those buying and selling organizations. Traditionally and predominantly, the vast majority of EDI projects involved organizations sending orders and receiving invoices via EDI. In this scenario, the buying organization will send orders electronically and then doesn't receive or send anything further until the invoice is sent back in. There are, of course, significant benefits to not having to post or email orders and invoices or manually key data into back office systems to generate documents and input order and invoice data. However, the evolution of EDI has seen more and more organizations tackling the whole order to invoice cycle via electronic means. So in more recent times, in addition to the buying organization sending out the order to the supplier, we've seen the supplier acknowledging the order and confirming details such as quantities, pricing, and fulfillment dates. And this process might actually also require an order amendment. And once the order has been finalized through these electronic iterations, the supplier will send an advanced shipping notification, often referred to as an ASN or dispatch note. This step also typically includes the production of a GS1 compliant barcoded label, which means when the goods arrive at their delivery point, their delivery location, the barcoded label can be scanned by the buying organization, and these goods will be automatically receipted into their ERP or warehouse management system. And this again avoids the need to key data in manually. Once the goods have been received, the buyer can issue a goods received note, sometimes referred to as a GRN or proof of delivery, from which the supplier can invoice against. And the real benefit here is that where what has actually been delivered varies from the initial order, the invoice is matched against the GRN rather than the initial order. And then the invoice matching rates of the buying organizations are greatly improved, which is ultimately beneficial to all involved in the order to invoice process. And increasingly, organizations are taking EDI even further and exchange things like credit and debit notes, remittances, price files, product information, stock and sales data, and product inventory data electronically. Of course, many organizations still operate without EDI, and if we look at life without EDI, we quickly see there's a reliance on many manual processes to achieve the required business objectives. And EDI doesn't necessarily change the supply chain processes, but it does significantly improve them by removing manual processes and the need to key and rekey data and the associated risk of human error. The technical architecture of EDI solutions has evolved over the years. As we said at the outset, the objective of EDI is to process data without human intervention. And in the days before cloud computing, in order to achieve the objective, buying and selling organizations would each require an EDI software engine that could interpret and translate the different types of EDI standards and messages being transmitted. Typically, information was sent via a value-added network, or VAN, which is essentially a private network used to send EDI messages. The VAN essentially takes data sent by one organization, it stores and forwards it on to the next, so it can be downloaded and taken into the receiving ERP system. The EDI software would typically sit on a desktop PC, and often full ERP integration would only be achieved by the buying organization, whilst their smaller suppliers were often found to be receiving orders on their desktop PC, manually printing them off, then manually keying orders into their own ERP systems, and then taking invoice data back off their ERP system and keying that back into the EDI software before sending it back to the buyer. So the potential benefits of EDI were only partially realized in the early days. So if we look at EDI in 2018, then we can see there's a much less reliance on EDI software at both ends. Most businesses we speak to who are looking at implementing a fully managed EDI service are looking for the software application which provides the message translation and transmission to be hosted in the cloud by the provider. And this removes the need for EDI software at both ends. And it can also remove the need for a value-added network, as we can now use more modern connectivity methods to transmit data securely and reliably. All data translation, conversion, transformation, and validation can be performed in the cloud. Again, this reduces the reliance on EDI expertise or capability at both ends and enables EDI to be outsourced and delivered as a fully managed service. However, one thing that hasn't changed is that we still see lots of organizations that are not fully integrating EDI into their back office systems. And this is typically because the volumes of EDI messages are not considered sufficient enough to warrant investment in a full ERP integration. As we've touched on earlier, there are a number of EDI standards in place globally, which adds to the complexity surrounding the exchange of messages in an electronic format. These standards are essentially the language in which the EDI message is transmitted. So we've got TraderComms, which is a UK-based standard. EDIFACT and EANCOM are widely used throughout Europe. ANSI is the North American standard, and we're also seeing more and more use of XML. And as there are a number of different standards where businesses are trading with multiple partners and across a wide geographical area, then managing and maintaining their EDI connections can become a complex and fairly onerous undertaking. We also need to send those EDI messages, and there are a number of ways in which information is transmitted. So we talked earlier about the traditional VAN. We can also use internet-based technology such as FTP or AS2, which are both safe, reliable, secure, and potentially more cost-effective alternatives to the value-added network. So who is EDI for exactly? Well, the answer is pretty much any organization who is buying or selling typically a relatively high volume of products and needs to streamline their processes. And EDI is used across many industries, including CPG, manufacturing, building suppliers, insurance sectors. But often the decision to use EDI is driven by customer mandate. So a good example of that is that we talk to lots of suppliers to supermarkets who make it a condition of business that they will trade electronically, or they simply won't be able to sell their products in the supermarket stores. And we work with many businesses selling into the likes of Sainsbury's, Tesco and Aldi who need to set up EDI for the first time. Similarly, we work with many of those customers who wish to connect to their extensive supplier base and automate some processes. And we also work with many clients who already use EDI but want to extend the types of messages that they're exchanging to add further automation into the process and streamline the entire supply chain by implementing EDI messages with both their customers and their suppliers. So we've discussed the different EDI standards and the ways to transmit EDI messages. It'll be no surprise to hear that there are a number of options around how organizations can become established with EDI. So we'll now cover the different types of EDI and different delivery models that are available. The most simplistic option, and one which is very quick and easy to set up, is web EDI. This is often used by organizations that can't justify the investment in fully integrated EDI, and tends to be smaller suppliers into larger organizations who don't do high order volumes or perhaps don't have a sophisticated back office system. They're typically supplying larger organizations who mandate the use of EDI, and so web access is an easy way to enable that. And buying organizations often talk about the 80-20 rule, whereby 80% of their volume is done by 20% of the supplier base. And those 20% of suppliers are typically EDI capable and fully integrated. However, it's that long tail end of suppliers, the 80% who do 20% of the volume, that often cause many of the administrative headaches, as they prefer more manual paper-based processes and have a lack of systemization in place. So it's these suppliers that have the web option, which enables the buyer to still receive EDI messages, whilst the supplier doesn't have to go to the lengths of fully integrating. There's no software is required, only a web browser and an internet connection. There's often no cost to the supplier to get set up and to use EDI, although some buying organizations will impose a supplier pays model. We've already talked about fully integrated EDI, where data passes from one ERP system to another without human intervention. There is, of course, a setup cost and an annual managed service fee, typically for an integrated solution, but there are many benefits based upon the removal of manual processes, which we've already touched on. So there are also a few ways to deliver these solutions, and again, we touched on some of this earlier on. Traditionally, there was an on-premise in-house delivery model where software is installed at each end and messages sent by a value-added network. There's a heavy reliance there on internal IT resource to deliver and support an in-house solution. In recent years, we've seen more and more organizations move to an outsourced model where the software is hosted externally by a cloud provider. However, support of the system is still managed in-house. Where we see the real benefit lies is where EDI is outsourced to a fully managed service. And here we're taking the software application into the cloud, and the knowledge, expertise, capability and support is handed across to the EDI provider to manage on a day-to-day basis. So I think at this point it's worth outlining how TrueCommerce delivers its fully managed EDI service. So the main point to make is that TrueCommerce delivers a proactive managed service whereby we take on full responsibility for ensuring that messages keep flowing between our clients and their trading partners. Where there are issues with messages not being delivered, failing translation, or a breakdown in connectivity and communication, well, TrueCommerce is immediately aware of this and will take steps to resolve these problems, often without having to involve our clients. And that, I guess, is one of the main differentiators for TrueCommerce in the marketplace. The objective here is to keep the client environment as simple as possible, so no software or hardware is necessarily required in the client's environment. This isn't always the case, as we can optionally install interfaces for ERPs like Microsoft Navision and AX, plus Sage and NetSuite. And TrueCommerce delivers its service using the one-time EDI software application. And this resides on our hosted servers, which are operating across two high availability IBM data centers geographically separated in Warwick and Portsmouth. And OneTime enables users to connect by both the fully integrated and web EDI route. So all clients, whether they're receiving messages via their ERP or via the web, can access the OneTime web portal, and they can see details such as message tracking, or they can search for specific orders and invoices that they need to look into. And the OneTime hosted services include message conversion. So OneTime will convert any message format to any message format. OneTime handles all the necessary data translation, for example, converting item codes that suppliers use into those used by their customers. OneTime will also provide message validation. So for example, where invoices can be validated to ensure that they refer to an existing purchase order. And whilst incoming purchase orders can be checked for things like correct ship to locations and item codes. And if we think about a normal or typical flow of EDI messages through this OneTime platform and this diagram. So firstly, maybe a customer sends an order to OneTime in their preferred message format using their preferred connectivity protocol. OneTime will process the orders by converting them into the OneTime format and applying data translation in the database. It will validate and store the orders in the OneTime database. It will then retrieve the orders from the OneTime database and convert them to the supplier's receiving format, their preferred format, before finally sending them to the supplier using their preferred connectivity protocol. The portal option provides visibility and supports suppliers and customers who are not integrated into their back office applications but still wish to trade electronically with their partners. And their suppliers can view, acknowledge and ship orders and invoice orders, whilst customers can create orders and receive invoices. OneTime also provides a throughput monitor which alerts on business rule exceptions typically. So if a supplier, for example, expects to receive 20 orders from customer A by 6 AM each day and 30 orders from customer B by 8 AM, then we can set that schedule up in our platform. And if those orders do not arrive as expected, our managed service desk will be alerted and they'll diagnose any issues with OneTime, the supplier or their customer, or even their customer's EDI provider. And that can be a very useful and proactive feature to take advantage of in OneTime. And finally, the managed service includes the setup and implementation of the OneTime hub to meet your specific requirements, the onboarding of customers and suppliers, and of course the proactive monitoring of the application and that diagnostics of any problems, taking corrective action, often without having to involve our clients. So I'd like now just to summarize the general benefits of EDI. The key one for me really is the elimination of manual data entry processes, the increase in speed and efficiency. So if we remove the need to post and email documents, we're significantly reducing the time spent doing business. The efficiency gain of not having to key information into back office systems is really where a lot of the benefit lies in organizations that are doing high volumes. And of course, by automating, we can increase productivity without increasing headcount. And by having validation through the cycle to ensure what is ordered is what will be delivered and what has been delivered is correctly invoiced, then ultimately we're able to reduce lead times and the time it takes for suppliers to be paid. And ultimately, automation of processes helps significantly reduce the cost of doing business. The reduction in errors associated with manual data entry will help improve accuracy, and it will impact positively on customer service. Whilst buying organisations are often better placed to benefit from prompt payment discounts, where suppliers are more likely to meet their lead times, which reduces the likelihood of any chargeback penalties being imposed for missed deadlines and lead times. Compliance with key trading partners is clearly a benefit enjoyed by suppliers and the main reason for them adopting EDI, as discussed previously. And suppliers can often ensure that they avoid fines for non-compliance, they're in a stronger position to both retain and win new business, as being EDI capable is seen as a real tick in the box for most buying organisations when it comes to selecting their suppliers. And finally, real-time visibility across the supply chain enables better control and understanding, which in turn enables more informed operational decision making, impacting positively throughout the business. And we also see that where both the buyer and the supplier are working together via EDI, this increased visibility helps kickstart improved supplier performance and ultimately results in more on-time and in-full deliveries, which is beneficial for everybody. Okay, so this final slide just contains a few words about TrueCommerce. I'll let you digest that. I'm not going to read that out, but I'll just hand over to Robert, who'll be happy to take some of your questions.
Thank you for that, Dan. Now, before we finish, I just want to pick up on some of the questions we've had through today. We've had quite a lot, so I'll try and get through as many as possible. The first question we've had through, Dan, is what is the difference between EDI standards and connectivity types?
Okay, thanks, Robert. So I guess there's a fundamental difference here in that it's probably easiest to think about the EDI standards as different languages in which EDI messages can be created. So, so very much like human language, the types of EDI standard varies geographically across the world. I hope that makes sense. The connectivity method is the way in which the EDI message is transmitted, or sent from one location to another. We obviously need to be able to send EDI securely, safely, and reliably. So that's why we use robust connectivity methods such as AS2, FTP, or VAN, and that's essential really to be able to send the message in whichever standard it's been created. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. And how can I ensure I can implement EDI as quickly as possible when asked by my customer?
Right. Okay. That's a really good question. I guess there's quite a lot of things to think about, or that are worth thinking about before you start approaching an EDI provider. But when you first speak to an EDI provider to help you implement an EDI solution, there's some typical questions you'll get asked and you'll need to know the answers to. So things like who are the trading partners that you wish to connect with? What EDI messages do you need to exchange with your trading partners? Is it things like orders, invoices, ASNs, etc.? How many messages do you anticipate exchanging per annum with those partners? And typically this can be gleaned by looking back at the previous year's trading records. Would you like to integrate EDI into your ERP system? And if so, how would you like messages to flow in and out of the ERP? And obviously that will require some investigation into the ERP system you're using and the formats it requires. That also, I guess, it comes on to the question, what connectivity method is preferable in order to exchange EDI? And I guess, do you require 24/7 support to ensure that EDI messages are flowing continuously? Or would normal business hours suffice? So if you've got an answer to all of those sort of questions, that'll definitely help your EDI provider understand your requirements and be in a position to recommend the most appropriate service provision for your business. And from there, I guess the implementation of EDI is very much run on a partnership basis. So there will need to be project resourceful collaboration between your organization and the EDI provider to enable the messages to be integrated quickly and effectively into your back office systems. So understanding and mapping out the project timelines and having the resource available to work hand in hand with your EDI provider will help speed up the implementation process.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. The next one is, how do I ensure I choose a good managed service to support my solution?
Another good question. So there are lots of EDI providers out there. If you Google them, I'm sure you'll come across them. And there are many that will claim to deliver a fully managed EDI service. I guess it's really important to lift the bonnet and look under the cover to to examine exactly what they mean by this and what's included in the managed service. So there's a real distinction between simply managing and supporting the software application as opposed to proactively monitoring the flow of EDI messages, and when there are issues, resolving them, and investigating and resolving those, and finding an EDI provider that has this capability and has the ability to resolve issues, potentially 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year is important if you want that comfort and peace of mind that by outsourcing your EDI, you're really handing that across to a safe pair of hands.
Okay, brilliant. I think we've got time for one more. Which roles within an organization benefit from EDI, and which team usually implements it?
Again, another good question. So I guess it does to a certain extent depend upon the EDI software and the service that's implemented. So where EDI is fully outsourced and delivered as a fully managed service, that it will take responsibility for managing support and supporting EDI out of the IT function, which means that they can be left to focus on strategic projects and less reliance upon them to support EDI. IT will still need to be involved in the initial implementation typically, because there'll be connectivity requirements and integration to the ERP system, which will require their input, I'm sure. With TrueCommerce, I mentioned earlier, the one-time platform provides it's a web portal solution that can be accessed by lots of different people within a business with permission to do so, and the portal can give that overview of all messages that have been communicated with their trading partners over a specific time period. So you can get wider business benefits. People like in the finance team, like accounts payable, can benefit from improved invoice matching. Credit control could log in and investigate whether invoices were actually received by their customers. You could give visibility to sales and supply chain so that they can see orders coming into the business, and customer services teams will even see reduced calls regarding where's my order or where's my invoice, as the exchange of information electronically keeps everybody informed in real time as to where these messages are. So it's a good question. There are potentially a number of roles within an organization that could benefit from using EDI.
Brilliant. Okay, that's all we have time for today, but I can see that we've had many more questions to answer, so we will look to follow up all the questions with the participants after the webinar. Lastly, for anyone who would like a copy of the webinar, we will be sending a link to the recording in the coming days. If you do need to get in touch with TrueCommerce, we have offices in the UK, Ireland and Denmark, and the contact details for each of these offices can be found above. All that remains for me to say is thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar today, and we hope you enjoyed it.